means strengthening our flagship Safe Streets program and bringing other organizations into the fold. The mayor's committed to bringing stronger oversight and accountability of Safe Streets and a focus on commitments to our frontline violence interrupters, and so focusing on greater support, safety, training, and career pathway development for this workforce. City government's oversight of Safe Streets Baltimore has grown under the Scott administration, and we're continuing to find ways to improve, strengthen, and evolve the work, and that's some of what we'll share today as we go through the process. Go to the next slide. So the format of our presentation today, we will cover some context around Safe Streets. We'll go step by step through the hiring process from start to finish, from application through vetting, through interviews to actual hiring recommendation. We'll provide an update on the Beller Edison site and discuss some of the data, outputs, and outcomes associated with Safe Streets. So going to the next slide, let's start by talking about what it is that Safe Streets is responsible for. This is an evidence-based public health program to reduce gun violence. The program came to Baltimore in 2007, under which time it was under the purview of the Baltimore City Health Department as a public health intervention strategy and outreach-based intervention strategy. It's modeled after the Cure Violence program, which employs violence intervention specialists to mediate brewing conflicts that could result in gun violence. Safe Streets workers focus on community outreach, public education, conflict mediation, and violence interruption within a specific geographic area. And so on the next slide, I'll share the structure and context of the program just organizationally from MONSE through our community-based organizations that are partners in this work. So as you can see, the org structure that you see at the top, you can see from the MONSE director to MONSE's gun violence prevention associate director, to our community violence intervention deputy director and a staff for community violence intervention. This team and this line provides programmatic oversight and strategic alignment with the program. We provide direct technical assistance to the site staff and community-based organizations. We provide standard operations management and administrative support. And we maintain the integrity of the evidence-based community violence intervention model and ensure regular empirical evaluation. And so those are really our responsibilities as a city agency under which this program is housed. LifeBridge Health Center for Hope and Catholic Charities are our two community-based operators of Safe Streets. LifeBridge Center for Hope, you can see the 6 sites: Park Heights, Franklin Square, Woodburn, McCabe, Belvedere, Beller Edison, and McElderry Park, which is under their purview. And then Catholic Charities provides day-to-day operations for 4 of our sites: Brooklyn, Cherry Hill, Penn North, and Sandtown, Winchester. We've gotten questions at times about the standard structure for sites, how the site hierarchy itself is actually structured. This is just a graphic I pulled from a report that we shared back in April 2022, really putting on paper what the model of Safe Streets is in Baltimore. Our community-based organizations, they hire staff who have credibility within and familiarity of the site post. They must possess strong relationships with people who are most at risk for gun violence in the community and have a strong understanding of the social determinants of health. This is a public health model, and so a typical site structure is shared here. The 2 leadership positions, kind of what we consider top leadership positions, which I'll return to a few times throughout this presentation. We have site director and violence prevention coordinator. That's what we see as our leadership positions. And then a site supervisor who oversees violence interrupters. So almost every one of our 10 sites follows this model with very few exceptions. I believe Sandtown Winchester has additional violence interrupters just given the size of that catchment zone. But we'll talk a little bit about the specific site breakdown in just a moment. But this represents the site hierarchy. Jumping into a little bit of context, I mentioned at the top the Scott administration's commitment to community violence intervention and strengthening Safe Streets specifically. Back in January 2021, when MONSE as an office officially got started, the mayor tasked us with something very clear and simple: conducting an internal assessment and evaluation of Safe Streets, cultural, operational norms, how the sites were doing, whether implementation across all 10 sites looked the same or whether we saw variation, how the workforce felt about their work, how the community felt about Safe Streets. And so through a series of interviews, that internal report was something that we released in April 2022. It can be found on our website. We shared the outcomes of that evaluation and our recommendations for how the work would be strengthened. And then in July 2022, for the first time, Monty put on paper standard operations guidance for our community-based organizations. Prior to the Scott administration, the guidance that existed around Safe Streets was largely what had been done in practice, what was listed in the contracts, but we did not have clearly documented standard operating procedures, and that has changed. The Scott administration has put together a full development of standard operations protocol that not just Safe Street sites, but all of our community violence intervention partners play a role in. And then in January 2023, I'm just bringing us up to more recent history, administrative site transitions were complete. So one of the things that came out of that internal evaluation of Safe Streets, we knew we had 8 community-based organizations operating sites. We saw a lot of variation in the implementation across those 10 sites. And so there was an opportunity to work more closely with 2 of those providers, both who had experience running Safe Street sites, Catholic Charities and LifeBridge Health, who also played other roles in our community violence intervention ecosystem in the realm of hospital violence intervention, victim services, other wraparound supports. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Catholic Charities is the operator of 4 sites, while Center for Hope administers 6. So I'm going to jump in next to a slide that I think we'll probably come back to throughout this presentation and the Q&A around the hiring process. The hiring process is a process that is intensive. It's involved. I've said before that not just anyone can be a Safe Streets worker. This work is highly specialized. It requires someone who has credibility within the community, who has credibility with the high-risk population that the public health model is meant to intervene with. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to screen out candidates who may not be the best fit, who may not have the right qualifications for the role, who may not have credibility in their site before we're even getting to an interview panel. So with that being said, I'll walk through this quickly just so we're on the same page. For our Safe Streets community-based organization, so by that I mean Catholic Charities or LifeBridge, they are recruiting prospective candidates up for posted vacancies. Prospective Safe Streets candidates can then submit a job application via Catholic Charities or LifeBridge for positions that they are hiring for. The Safe Streets CBO then submits a list of applications that they've received to Monty, at which time we enter those names into the preliminary background vetting process. Monty's Gun Violence Prevention Associate Director, Crystal Miller, is to my left, and she can absolutely speak more to this process. She submits that list of prospective candidates to the Baltimore Police Department for an initial preliminary background review. Monty and BPD meet on the submitted names to discuss who can move forward. There are certain kinds of charges that we're looking for. We want to do a level of deconfliction. If there are individuals who may be engaged in an active investigation or something of that nature, we wouldn't want to allow them to continue through the interview process. And so those are the kind of things that that first round of background vetting allows us to do in partnership with the police department. Then, once we have that meeting with BPD, Monty communicates the names that are cleared from that first round of vetting to our community-based organization to let them know we're ready to enter into that next phase of vetting. And this phase of vetting is one that Monty does play a role in. Our CVI outreach liaisons who are staff at Monty do an in the community vetting. And so in that process, anyone who clears initial background vetting goes out into the community, walks with our CVI outreach liaison, and we're able to assess, does this person know the neighborhood that they want to work in? Do they have credibility? How are they received? Are there concerns that are coming up in that process that we need to be mindful of? And so after that, in the community vetting, for anyone that's getting a thumbs up from our team that we're saying, yes, this seems like a great prospective candidate who represents the values and qualities we want to see in someone associated with Safe Streets, then we're at the point of moving them forward to an interview panel. That interview panel includes a few people. It includes, obviously, the community-based organization that is the hirer. It includes Monty. It includes a representative of the community, and it includes a district rep from BPD. And it's a consensus model. And so all of those folks have to agree following the interview that this is someone we want to move forward into the program. If a recommendation is made coming out of that interview panel that this candidate's great, we want to move forward with them, that candidate then would move into Catholic Charities or LifeBridge Health's actual onboarding and hiring process. And so that's how that recommendation comes to be. I know this is a long process, but I think it bears repeating that we're very meticulous and intentional in the vetting process. We've taken a lot of time to make sure that we're able to do that process seamlessly with BPD, that we're able to quickly move candidates through the process. I have to thank BPD for being really great partners in that effort. We couldn't do it without them, and we think the part of the process they play is absolutely important. We can go ahead to the next slide and jump into some of the numbers here. So for those of you who saw my presentation before the council back on Valentine's Day, we shared some of this information, and we've been able to make some progress even in the past 2.5 weeks. So this outlines the current vacant positions as of March 5th for all 10 of our sites. So you'll notice that we have 28 total vacancies across 10 sites. 3 of those are at the site director level. 4 of those are at the violence prevention coordinator level, again, across all 10 sites. We are hiring for 1 site supervisor, and we have 20 violence interrupter positions that we're currently hiring for. And so this, we've done and completed our process alignment with the Baltimore Police Department around the hiring and vetting process itself, and in partnership with our community-based organizations that administer Safe Street sites, we are deep in the recruitment, vetting, and hiring process, kind of in this hiring push. We know that we cannot have a fully operational program when we're not operating at staff capacity. We're never going to see the number of mediations that we could reach if we don't have full staff capacity, and so that is a major priority for us right now. I wanted to provide this information also by site. So you can see our site breakdown here, the number of budgeted positions, the number of staffed positions, and the number of vacant positions. And I'll break this down again in the next slide in just a moment, but want to pause here. Bel-Air Edison, we have 5 positions vacant out of 7 budgeted positions. As I believe the council is aware, the Safe Streets Bel-Air Edison site is temporarily inactive, beginning a temporary pause in canvassing. We have 1 violence interrupter on staff. We have 1 VPC, one of our site leadership positions that's about to be onboarded. We're really excited to have identified at least 1/2 of our leadership team for the site. But without safe staffing levels, we cannot safely canvass the community. And so we're focused right now on a collaborative rebuild and reset with Monty, LifeBridge Center for Hope, and community stakeholders. That process is currently in progress, and I anticipate an update around Bel-Air Edison specifically within the next 2 weeks. So we're kind of have marked this month as rounding out our hiring push, and hope to be able to provide an update on Bel-Air Edison in that time frame. If we go to the next slide, I should also mention Cherry Hill is fully staffed. I'm going to highlight at least that one piece of news on that slide while I can. Okay. Going to the next slide, this helps break down how we are ranking the prioritization of hiring for our sites. When we are marking a site as priority, that means when we're working with the Baltimore Police Department to vet, when we're scheduling in the community vetting with our staff, we are prioritizing sites where we need to identify leadership, and we're making sure we have safe staffing levels for canvassing. Bel-Air Edison is our top priority for hiring. You can see we have 1 of 2 leadership positions that we need to identify, and we currently do not have safe staffing levels for canvassing, and so that is a high priority. You can see there are 2 other sites that are high priority, Franklin Square and Park Heights. In both of those sites, we have to hire for the top leadership positions, and so that's a major priority for us. And you can see that the majority, at least half of our sites, exactly half of our sites, have all leadership identified, and all of our sites, with the exception of Bel-Air Edison, have safe staffing for canvassing levels. And so this helps break down and give a little more detail to what we're seeing in terms of the health of Safe Streets from a hiring and vacancy perspective, and where we're focusing our attention in that vetting and hiring process. So I mentioned that flow chart earlier. of the hiring process and the different roles that Monty, BPD, the community-based organization, and prospective candidates play. Since November 28th, we have seen 147 applications be submitted for Safe Streets positions to the community-based providers. 142 of those names were submitted for BPD vetting. 92 prospective candidates have been cleared in that time period by BPD. Monty has vetted in the community vetting for 58 of those candidates. We have 16 candidates that were cleared from that vetting process by Monty to move on to the interview round. We've conducted 6 interviews and ultimately hired 4 people. I think a few of these numbers may have even changed over the past day or so, but I did think that this was interesting from the perspective of, in that preliminary vetting with BPD, we're seeing approximately 62% of people move forward onto that next round. In that same period, we saw approximately 27% of candidates cleared in round 1 vetting who were then recommended for interview after round 2 vetting. And so we are really being intentional about who are the right people to have in this role, and how can we make sure that folks at the staff level are upholding the integrity of the program and that we are maintaining a focus on our oversight role. Just a couple final slides here to round us out, and did want to address an update about the Bel Air Edison site. I mentioned that Bel Air Edison is temporarily inactive, including a temporary pause in canvassing. There's no indication that Safe Streets Baltimore was the subject of the investigation. I mentioned that we are stepping through a collaborative reset and rebuild of the site. It is our highest priority. But there are a few things that we're doing while the site is temporarily closed, which can be found on the next slide. So during this temporary pause, we're focusing on community engagement and neighborhood stabilization. This is something that Monty's doing in partnership with LifeBridge, and also with Living Classrooms Foundation Operation Respond. Dante, who is at the helm of Operation Respond, is a former Bel Air Edison site director, and so someone who has a lot of credibility in the community, and who does work now in the community violence intervention ecosystem, connecting people to critical resources, which is really at the heart of Safe Streets. So I mentioned, and we'll just highlight here again, the requirements for making the determination to reopen the site. We need leadership identified. I mentioned we have 1 of 2 of those positions filled. So we're almost there, but not quite there yet. And then we will need safe staffing levels for canvassing. Currently, that's not met, but we do have a few violence interrupter candidates for Bel Air Edison matriculating through that process. Finally, just wanted to end with a brief discussion on data, outputs, and outcomes. There were no homicides in any Safe Streets catchment areas during the months of November and December 2023. Is something that we definitely want to highlight and recognize. Safe Streets Penn North, as some of you may have seen yesterday, achieved 365 days plus with no gun-related homicides. As of today, it's been 479 days. And in 2023, Safe Streets staff recorded 1,453 mediations. Our staff have conducted 184 mediations this year through March 2nd. I mentioned earlier that staffing has an impact on the number of mediations we can conduct, and so we look forward to really being able to press and drive these numbers as we get additional staff on board. And then finally, I wanted to just end here. This is actually just a screen grab from an example of one of the reports that Monty shares on our website. We have taken, one of the things that we did, I should say, as far as strengthening Safe Streets, was made improvements to the way that data is collected and documented, making sure we can have a higher level of detail around the data, that we can play an even greater role in that realm from a technical assistance perspective. This is an example of an annual report that we've made. So taking kind of aggregate level mediation data, things that are that we're able to share at that level that don't jeopardize any concerns around public safety, really being able to see when did a mediation happen, what was at the crux of that mediation, how does that interplay with some of the public safety statistics. And so I would invite anyone who's interested in this to take a look at the reports we have with Safe Streets data on our website, because it is something that we're committed to being transparent and sharing about. And I think that's the end of our presentation, so happy to go into questions.
All right, thank you very much. I guess I'll get it started. This was definitely very informative. Learned a lot of new things about the process just from that flow. Just out of curiosity, who ultimately makes, because we saw we went from like 168 candidates down to 4 hired. Who makes the ultimate decision whether or not somebody gets hired or not?
The ultimate decision to hire is with the community-based organization that is the employer. As I mentioned, a hiring recommendation comes out of the panel, and if there's an individual around that table who has strong reservations about a candidate, that candidate is likely not going to be recommended for hiring. But the ultimate decision is our employer. I think we've had instances where someone was recommended for hiring, and for whatever reason, through going through the community-based organizations process, they weren't able to fully make it through that process. They are the employer.
Gotcha. Is there a reason that they're, I mean, were they here before and then just left, or was there a reason they're not here tonight? The two employees, Catholic Charities and LifeBridge?
I know I spoke to them about the hearing. I let them know what was happening. I don't believe they received an invitation from the council. I know we're here, by request of the council.
Yeah. Okay. Because we can't force them to come here. They don't work for us. We're not under contract with them. So.
Was that request made, Councilman?
I mean, no. Okay.
Okay.
The next question I have is regarding. I saw in a few different parts of the process it said about BPD is involved in vetting. Speak for myself, that's new to me. So what is BPD's role in the vetting process?
I'm going to allow Crystal to take that since she works directly with BPD in that process. This actually isn't a new part of the process, but I am happy to say we've strengthened the process. We've been able to expedite and streamline it with our partners at BPD, but they play a role from kind of beginning to end. But Crystal, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Good evening, everyone. So in our partnership with BPD and the vetting process, it is the first round of making sure that we have individuals who aren't going to bring any open records into the hiring process, or if there are any offenses that are automatic eliminations from continuing through the hiring process. And those items would be offenses, any sexual offenses, any offenses with arson, or cases of child abuse. That is an immediate elimination. And so through that vetting process, we're also looking to make sure, like I just mentioned, that there aren't any open cases or anything that would jeopardize someone's credibility or their safety if they were to continue through the hiring process and then onboarded.
Gotcha. So if you can just walk me through that a little bit. So what does that look like as far as BPD's role? So if BPD, runs somebody and they say, oh, this one's not recommended, this person's not recommended, is that an automatic disqualification?
Depending on what the cause is for that no for recommendation, as far as what they legally can share with us, as we are not sworn officers, there's only so much information we can be provided by BPD on why there is a no for recommendation to continue through. But typically, because of the relationship and what we've been able to establish in that partnership with BPD, there are some clear defined criteria that we share and that BPD shares, and being able to make that determination together. And if there is an individual who has been recommended and may have some strong ties to the community, they may be considered to continue through, but typically it's a no.
Gotcha. So there is a possibility that somebody who BPD says, we can't give you all the specifics, but we wouldn't recommend this person. is it still physically possible that they end up getting hired?
I would say probably not. It's a strong chance that they would not be hired.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, from us, if we're not getting back the name, like the affirmative from BPD on a candidate via our process, we're not moving in the community vetting. And so unless there was some other kind of strong circumstance, I think we can say no, that candidate is not moving forward.
Gotcha. And do the applicants sign a waiver that allows that they know that they're going through this vetting process through BPD, and that BPD may run them through databases that standard background checks wouldn't have access to?
With the application process, that understanding is established with, are you agreeing to a background check? And as folks are recruited for Safe Streets, it is shared that there is a vetting process and there are phases of the vetting process. So that, I would say that is the agreement, and sharing that understanding that you'll be going through vetting process, and then with the agreement on signing an application to be hired.
Gotcha. So they're run through the same process, the NCIS process that BPD vets officers through?
I'm not familiar enough with the process that BPD vets officers through to say that definitively.
Uh-huh. So, I mean, are you familiar whether or not they put him through that program that the police department has?
There are several systems used through BPD to determine whether or not someone should be able to move through the vetting process. What those systems are by name, I'm not certain of.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Did you have any questions?
Yeah,
Mr. President?
just like Chairman said, yeah, I think this provided a lot of oversight and clarity on the intense nature of the vetting process for someone to become hired. I know many of us have gone through different job applications and processes, and I would beg to argue that nobody in this room has gone through the level of vetting and steps to kind of ascertain a job. So thank you for that level of detail, but that's the point of this hearing, just to ensure that we're putting out there that there are steps in place and communicating, because again, the hard working men and women of Safe Streets, the ones that are doing the job the right way, deserve to have that same level of clarity and have that trust with community members and public officials alike. With that said, could you go over, and I'm not sure you're prepared, the payment, the salaries of these individuals? A lot of times I think that gets lost when we talk about the hard work that they do, and then we start looking at the stats, and we look at even the fact that they want to do this work and kind of go through the process you just laid out to us. But are you prepared to kind of talk about salary?
So the starting salary for Safe Streets for violence interrupters is $45,000 a year. For violence prevention coordinators and site supervisors is $50,000 a year, and site directors is $65,000 a year. I will add that those base salaries were established in 2022 with a lot of the structuring that we've done for Safe Streets to ensure that staff are earning a livable wage for the work that they are doing.
Yes, thank you for your leadership in increasing the salaries. I know that that's been talk on this council. Are you prepared to talk about the benefits that they receive? Or no? Is it specific by CBO?
I would also add that there is a cost of living allowance that staff should also receive with that salary increase, and benefits are based off the benefit packages that the employers offer for their employees. So those benefit packages may differ based off of the CBOs. Many of our staff, they are now receiving life insurance, health insurance, and other benefits that they may not receive from any other types of employment.
Thank you again. I think that was another push by this council, particularly as it relates to life insurance, knowing some of the occurrences that have happened over the past several years. I believe that wraps up my questions as it relates to the onboarding and hiring process and payment. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos, do you have any questions? Councilman Torrance, do you have any questions? Okay. So I got a couple more questions. So do any of these, at what point, did any of these employees ever work for the city? Like, were Safe Streets employees prior to these CBOs, were they ever city employees?
No, Safe Streets staff members have never been city employees from the inception of the program in 2007. The first site, those staff members were employees of Living Classrooms.
Living classrooms, okay.
And this goes back to the inception of the program, the time that the program was within the purview of the health department.
Gotcha. So even back then, they weren't city employees?
No.
Gotcha. Because I just recall I've been at, certain block parties or events, and, they would have city ID, so I wasn't sure if they were city employees and then got moved over to not being city employees, which obviously you get less benefits working for a Living Classroom than you would working for the city or something like that.
There's always been staff, I will say, there's been staff on the city government side doing similar to the work we do today, technical assistance, and providing support. I know, like back in the day, some of the people who were associated with Safe Streets on the city government side started as, peer recovery specialists and outreach folks in that realm. But there has, like Crystal said, from the inception been that partnership, very intentionally so, with community-based organizations, because a program like this is one that they can do things that city officials can't. They can have conversations that city officials can't, and they're seen and received differently by the community than a city official might be.
Gotcha.
And when they were under the health department, I can't remember the organizational structure, but there were folks that were inside of the health departments that they blended right in with the Safe Streets employees. Dante Barksdale, for instance, who was a city employee. So I think that might be some of the confusion that you might have if you see them wearing the shirt and with the men and women of Safe Streets, that they were a city employee. They just was connected to the work and really believed in the work and had that symbiotic relationship with them.
Gotcha. And on slide 6, you mentioned about the SOP, and it's been updated over time. Is that something you can provide to the committee?
I'd be happy to brief the committee on the contents of that operations manual. It is a document from city government that we share with our community-based organizations that are actually our contracted partners. Is a very extensive document. It's something that I'd be happy to brief you about, Councilman, and make sure you understand the contents of it. I would need to consult with the law department just on what that would look like. I think we've gotten guidance in the past that sort of document should not be released in that fashion.
Right. Is that still the position of the law department?
I'd have to see the document, so I'm happy to have that conversation.
Okay. I mean, so the committee request that I'm putting out there is that I would like a copy of the SOP, and then if for some reason there's a reason you can't provide it, I would like to obviously get an explanation from the law department as to why that is. There's one question that I had regarding the SOP that was asked in the past regarding specific incidents when conflict mediations, you guys had shared at a previous hearing that 4 to 5 mediations involve guns. And so my question is, what happens when a conflict is mediated and there's guns present that are clearly illegal guns, meaning you have juveniles who are in possession of these guns? What is the standard operating procedure as to what the employees do after mediating that conflict?
So as we've shared in other settings, and as we continue to share what the purview of Safe Streets is that they are there to mediate conflicts and to de-escalate when there is a conflict that could result in violence, or following a violent incident to be able to mediate following that incident to prevent retaliation, so there's not any more violence and escalation in gun violence. But there is a separation between the work that Safe Streets does versus the work that law enforcement does, and there has to be that understanding between what that separation is for the credibility and safety of the staff of the program. that credibility allows him to go into spaces and places to be able to intervene and have those conversations where violence does not happen, even with the presence of weapons. So when there is a weapon present, their role is to put themselves between parties that could be either the person inflicting violence or someone who is injured by violence, and prevent that from happening, and maintaining that credibility so that the violence does not erupt and there's no ongoing conflicts between those parties. And so if there are weapons that are seen in those moments, no, they are not communicating that with law enforcement. It is important that they do not do that, because it maintains their credibility in the community and ability to go and to mediate those conflicts. And there are separate duties that law enforcement has versus what Safe Streets has for when there are weapons present.
Right, I understand. So is there ever a scenario where a Safe Streets worker would confiscate a gun
No.
from somebody on the street?
No.
Gotcha. Okay. Anybody have any other questions? Go ahead, Councilman Torrance.
I just want a quick follow-up, because I know what you just said, but I just want to make sure that people understand the distinction that, one, they don't confiscate weapons, but the next question is, if they do witness violence, do they participate in the criminal justice system if they do witness that violence? I just want to make sure that it's clear that, like, as a witness, if they saw it actually happen. There's been instances where there would probably have to happen, and I just want to make sure the public understands that that is a possibility, and that's why they're interrupting, to avoid that conversation. And if we did have incidents, have we tracked when those incidents have occurred?
I am not aware of any instances where Safe Street staff has participated in the criminal justice process of witnessing violence. I also would say that that also would probably bring a lot of questions to their credibility if they were a participant in that process. And where there are incidents witnessed or intervened, it is essential for those individuals who are participating in that to remain anonymous. So if those things happen, that Safe Streets will maintain that anonymity of the people involved. But I'm not aware to be able to speak to a clear response to whether or not there's ever been an instance where Safe Streets has participated.
Thank you. And my last question is regarding a process that your predecessor had said at a previous hearing, and I think you were on the team as well at that point. It's very clear, based on what we've seen, that there's certain locations that have had tremendous successes over the years, and certain ones that have struggled and haven't had those same. So we've seen data where in some places there's been tremendous success, like we just saw recently, but then we've also seen in some locations where crime and shootings have actually gone up. And so in response to that, your predecessor said that over a 2-year period, if a site could not really get its act together and have that impact on the community where they're seeing a reduction in crime, that site would no longer remain the site, and that those resources would be allocated elsewhere, either to another site or to another location or another team. Are you continuing that commitment, that a site that goes 2 years and is seeing an uptick in crime and is not being successful and is struggling like some of the locations have, that you too would also close that down and reallocate that to another spot, or to form a new team to hopefully turn that around?
One thing I would clarify, when you say reduction in crime, Safe Streets is not single-handedly responsible for reductions in crime. They're specifically focused on gun violence. And so while we look at other public safety metrics to understand what's happening within a certain geography so that we can provide our technical assistance and so that we can troubleshoot issues with them, I want to be really careful about this idea that we would just be thinking about a total reduction in crime and that being connected to whether or not a Safe Street site would get funding or not. I'll tell you where, from a leadership position, where we currently are and what my focus is. We are actively stabilizing and staffing our sites. And I fully expect that when we get to the point of stabilization and staffing, We want to make sure we can hold on to the good progress that we've made in many of the sites that we've made. We just had the first empirical evaluation of Safe Streets since 2018. We hadn't even evaluated prior to the Scott administration the rapid expansion of Safe Streets in 2019 to understand how did it look when we went to 10 sites. And so that evaluation happened. We got those results. We need to be really intentional about how we do that. And so, no, Councilman, I'm not, I wouldn't say that's something I'm comfortable committing to right now, but we are actively assessing with the commitment of evolving the model and making sure that the implementation of the model is effective in every single community where it exists.
All right, so can you share those results with the committee?
The Johns Hopkins study that came out last year.
Whatever data you have, I assume
Absolutely.
you guys are getting, because that's another thing that we learned at the last hearing. I think it was the member from Catholic Charities that said about how on a daily basis they communicate, they report to MONSE. Is that still happening? I know that hearing was a while ago, but.
Our teams are in touch frequently. I mean, we have standing meetings with the site staff and community-based providers, and we're spending time on the ground with our sites as part of our technical assistance provision. I don't know, Crystal, if there's anything that you would add to that specifically, but I know the last hearing that we had, if I'm thinking of the same one, was quite some time ago. So I know there's been a lot of work that's happened since then, and we're committed to continuing to do this work.
Right, so are there daily reports from each of the sites given to MONSE, like they indicated at that last hearing?
I think you're referring to what's entered into the case management system, and this is what we collect to create the report that you saw on the presentation. So what we use that information to do is to create reports like this to give and tell the story of the work that's happening on a daily basis at each of the sites. So it's not necessarily data that's given to us on a daily basis. It's entered into the case management system and used to share what work is done in the community, whether it's mediations, if there are referrals to services, community events that are held by sites. These are the information that we're looking at to determine what the sites are doing, the impacts that they're making.
Gotcha, okay.
And
So just to make sure, like oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just to clarify, so we track, it's daily tracking of coming up from the sites, mediations, and any other programming they do, and then from BPD's data, any incidents.
Okay, so are you able to provide like that kind of data to the council to show us like what those daily reports like look like, how many conflicts, to show like that there's not like just a gap in, in work being done, or that, they didn't take a week off? Is there a way we can see that just like we do with BPD on every level?
Outside of what you saw in the reports that we currently provide?
Yeah, I'm talking about like just, these daily reports that you're.
It's not like a standalone report. I think by daily reports, these are things that are digitally entered.
Right,
And so it's not like a form that they're filling out.
Right, so what was the data you had mentioned, the Johns Hopkins report? So what was that report based on? What data?
That was a social science study, which did an analysis, like a statistical analysis that I'm not going to be able to eloquently share with you right now. But that study was looking at implementation of Safe Street sites from the time that they opened through at some point last year to understand the impacts on public safety. And then it also included a cost-benefit analysis to understand what the public gets from their investment in Safe Streets, and it was a very positive evaluation, and we, across the board, saw positive public safety outcomes from that evaluation. We also saw some inconsistencies across the implementation of Safe Streets, and I think for me as a leader of this agency, that affirmed the work that we're doing is important. We have to make sure we're standardizing processes and we're making sure the program's consistently effective, not resting on our laurels.
Gotcha. So can you provide the information that was used for that report to be created, so we can see that and get a better understanding, location by location, of that data rather than the top level? So whatever data was provided to Hopkins or whoever did that study, can you provide that same raw data to the council?
We would need to look into that and get back to you. I think the reason we intentionally provide aggregate level data is because of some of the privacy and sensitive information that we referenced earlier.
And just to clarify, sir, so we have aggregate weekly reports. So that would in effect, that shows what you're asking for, and it's aggregated reports that we send out weekly.
So you're saying we can get everything that whoever did the study got?
I'm distinguishing between the raw data and our weekly reports that aggregate up at a weekly cadence what's happening at the sites. So that's
Right.
not the same as, obviously, that's not sharing
But you
all
said
the
you're,
underlying raw data, but it's
Yeah,
giving you.
I really just want to like kind of take a look. I like looking at data. I do it across multiple agencies all the time. And so, being that, the study was done and the data was shared outside of the city, surely I would assume that the oversight committee inside the city council, the one that's responsible for oversight over taxpayer dollars, would have the same access to that data.
I think there may be an assumption made about the kind of data that was provided to Hopkins to conduct that evaluation. I'm happy to look into that with my team and get back to you, but I don't know that the data that you're requesting is data that was provided to Hopkins in the fashion that you're asking for it.
I'm just asking to receive it in the same way Hopkins received it, with all the same information they received. Just take whatever email and data was forwarded to them, just forward it right over to the committee so we can review it in the same manner.
Like I said, we'll look into what data was shared. That evaluation predates my time, so I'm not sure offhand what was shared, but I'm happy to look into it and get back to you. We want to share everything that we possibly can that's not outside of legal limits to share with the council and publicly.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, we will recess this hearing. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for waiting out the last hearing. Have a good night. Thank you.
I just turned mine on. That's it? We couldn't say anything? I guess not.
Wow. No, I had questions.
Go up there and say one. Check, check. Yeah, she wanted.
Yep.
Check, check, check.
Yeah, I think she literally didn't. He didn't do that part. It's not her fault.